Okay, here we go. Hey everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. Now, you might have been seeing something go around. As a matter of fact, a lot of people have been talking about this and retweeting this, and some big names. I don't know if I can mention them here, but there's a video. It's a leaked video. It's going around. It's some of our our very top Canadian health officials talking about sort of what might be a new pandemic. But the thing about this video that strikes me is that, wow, there's nothing to worry about yet. And that's the thing that gets me. It's like, let's have a look at what some headlines you might be seeing in the news, although a lot of people aren't watching the news nowadays. But let's have a look. Let me just show you what they're on about. So if you look here, if you just put in the news, global news, bird flu. So one of the headlines, 4.2 million chickens will be killed after Iowa farm bird flu outbreak. Canada's milk supply still clear of bird flu amid growing problem in the US. So again, they're training you, they're shaping you, they're putting this in your brain that here's the new thing you need to fear based on these headlines. Australia's first human case of bird flu confirmed in child. Okay, as far as I know, there's no human-to-human transmission yet, but on we go. And then here's one of the other headlines. Bird flu risk to humans, an enormous concern, WHO says. Again, like this type of thing, listen, fool us once, don't fool us again. We've been down this road before. But I want to bring in a very special guest with me today to talk about this. I'm going to bring in from Bright Light News, Glen Jung. Hi, Glen.
Hey, how's it going, Anita?
It's going okay. I was really very struck by this video, as you know. I just because they're speaking in these tones like they're at a regular business meeting and everything is business as normal. But what they're talking about is so evil. And I thought you and I would watch bits of the video together and make our comments. Like we're going to watch this together so that other people, I hope other people watch it also. But before we get started, what are your first initial thoughts on all this bird flu hoo-ha?
Well, you know what? Hopefully this hoo-ha is something that people are starting to recognize and see a pattern for, especially after COVID, right? This has always been how the previous pandemics have come. I mean, look back at even if you go back to 2001, SARS-CoV, the original, they said up to, I think, 2 million people would die worldwide. I think there's less than 1,000 deaths worldwide. And then you've had the H1N1s and, this rollout of the Ebola, the Zika virus, this constant fear campaign that drives pharmaceutical sales is basically what we're looking at. And then when you look at it this year with, you especially see it with the measles campaign, it's just unbelievable. I'm now in Quebec here. And I was listening to, for the first time, I actually started listening to the CBC in my life. And just because I'm on the small island here and just putting it on the radio just to listen to it. And I was blown away. I think it was like in early February, I heard them say, there is one case of measles in Quebec. I'm like, one case in all of Quebec? And they're screaming this from the rafters and speaking in these really dire tones. And then they say, but there's nothing to fear. The family has, there's contact tracing going on for everyone that's been involved with the family and this and that. And they say, but there's nothing to fear because there's a safe and effective vaccine. I'm like, here we go again. I mean, if people cannot see through this, it speaks to how effective these military grade psyops are and decades of indoctrination to believe this. So,
and they're doing it again. They're doing it again right now. And somehow this video has leaked leaked of our health officials talking about a bird flu. But to my mind, they're sort of orchestrating a bird flu. Nothing has happened yet.
They actually had the first human case today reported in the US, I think.
Okay, but I mean, even that I don't believe so much because, I got to question the source because I don't know if human-to-human transmission is possible at this point. And then they're lumping this in with the cows. But let's have a look with what they're saying. We'll watch a bit of this video together. The opening remarks, this is a Zoom meeting that I guess we weren't supposed to see, but now we're all seeing it. So let's have a look.
The call is really to bring together the 4 public health agencies, the public health agency and the 3 provincial ones, at the start of what we think might be an interesting moment in the HPAI trajectory, the avian influenza H5N1.
I do intend on upping the tempo of those meetings, and would be really pleased to have input around agenda development.
When she says that, she goes, her name is Sarah. Let me just see who she is. Sarah Viback. She's from PHAC, P-H-A-C. She says, when she says upping the tempo, and when she says words like agenda, that really struck me. But okay, on we go. Anywhere where you see there's a flash, I kind of made an edit point there, so we didn't have to, watch the whole thing.
Yeah, it feels like a tabletop exercise already.
I know, crazy. Okay.
Our risk assessment activities happening. Folks will have seen that the PHN was told as well. We did release an update to our risk assessment looking at livestock risk, and that will be updated in as it's expected to be updated again in a couple of months' time. We'll flag there that we've also got really good engagement across PTs in assessing that risk, as well as our ongoing risk scenarios. So I'll stop there in the interest of leaving time for discussion. Dawn, I would invite you to chime in on some of the enhanced surveillance activities going on by CFIA and also our existing instruments.
Again, she said something that scared me when she said, we're going to now talk about our enhanced surveillance activities.
Yeah. All of these terms do not sound like something that you would expect from public health. I mean, it's just like hypervigilance, all towards the fear mongering that we heard through COVID.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
This recipe.
Unbelievable. And so the next guy we're going to hear from, he'll intro himself. His name is Don Shepard, VP for Infectious Diseases and Vaccines. He had a lot of interesting stuff to say. Here we go.
For that.
Thanks, Sarah, and good morning, colleagues. For those who don't know me, Don Shepard. I'm the Vice President for the Infectious Diseases and Vaccination Programs branch at the agency. So when we look at surveillance activities across the board, in my mind, I break it down into kind of 3 big buckets, and I'll go through them. The first, of course, is humans. So on the human side, what we've been doing is thinking about our existing Flu Watch and Sentinel surveillance networks that are monitoring for severe respiratory illness and flu, and looking about extending their activities past their normal cycle where they would be sunsetting, and then trying to balance the resources and energy required to do that versus the yield. So that
when he first said that, Glenn, I didn't really understand what flu he was talking about or really much about sunsetting.
Right. So he's talking about the Flu Watch is actually created for influenza A, B, the typical flu that you see that vanished during COVID because COVID, somehow the species just wiped out, made the influenza viruses go extinct. And now what he's talking about is sunsetting, is phasing out a policy, phasing out a product. And what he's talking about is rather than phasing out things, they're going to extend the actual surveillance on these severe respiratory illnesses, if I understand correctly what he's saying. So why would you do that? It's like bringing in a bigger microscope, extending the time so that you can identify more cases, and then more cases. It's exactly like COVID, right? You present more cases. What did they do during COVID? They didn't just say this many people apparently died with or from COVID in this year. They took 3 years worth of data and then just kept on accumulating it and accumulating it. We don't do that. We give data in terms of a yearly basis of deaths, right? And think about that. We went to like up to 50,000 deaths apparently from COVID. And then later on, of course, they dropped 15,000 people were resurrected, and somehow Health Canada dropped the number down to 35,000 deaths from COVID. But yeah, so essentially they're talking about...
That was always sort of in question. Is it from COVID or with COVID?
Yeah.
Some of these deaths, they were not just, they were with COVID. Gunshot wound. Oh, we swabbed them for COVID. Oh, it's a COVID death. Is it a COVID death or a gunshot wound? I had a nurse tell me that.
Yeah. And it's not even, and it's really even not even correct to say with COVID. It's PCR positive COVID, right? Because how many people were identified because of the false PCR test, which doesn't tell you if you're sick or not?
Yes.
How Yeah, how many people were actually had COVID, right? So you could die from a car accident, you had COVID, and there you go, you died with COVID.
PCR'd you, which, as we will hear very, very shortly, this man is going to talk about PCR in cows. So anyway, on we go. Here we go.
Is the yield. So that's the existing work that we have in flu surveillance. Then options for enhanced surveillance, Sarah had outlined. We've been doing some work on this for a while. Actually, in fact, when I was out in BC at AMI, I was speaking to some of the people out there that have done this in the past. And the big questions are how far to go and in what populations, and then with what techniques, and whether this is a molecular-based program, molecular plus serosurveillance. In the serosurveillance space, there's lots of technical questions about, is there an assay? What kind of an assay? How robust is it? How do you validate an assay in the absence of serum from humans with H5N1 disease, which, as we all know, we don't have a large number of, and we have no access to that serum from people with bovine exposures, at least at this point. So a lot to be worked out in that.
I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff he's saying there, and we're just sort of regular, reporters, laymen type of thing. So there's some things he's saying, but he's basically saying we don't have a lot. We don't have a lot to study from. We're going on really not much. That's kind of what I gleaned from that.
Yeah, I think what he's talking about when he says serosurveillance, they're talking about actually checking your blood serum for antibodies. And so I think he said in the absence of actually having serosurveillance, actual proof of antibodies that are being created in response to a virus, they're talking about, did he mention PCR tests there again?
No, he's going to.
Yeah, okay, so maybe that's where it's leading up to again. So again, it's like we don't have the data, but we're going to find the data.
Yes.
That space and a lot of conversations and work going on to develop that. As a minimum, we feel protocol development, having everything ready in the event that some testing comes back positive would be the minimum that we would like to see. And implementation would be a question that will be addressed once we have some of the information from the testing I'll talk to you about in a second. So that's the surveillance side. On the human side, I should say. The other two big pieces are cows and milk. From the cow side, what is going on is, as you will have heard, there is border testing for all cows coming into Canada now, aligned with the interstate requirements. That's molecular testing done on all cows coming in. There's always been a symptomatic cow testing pathway, and that.
Can I ask you a quick question,
go,
Donald?
Sure.
Just you say all cows. Does that mean? I guess this is my non-veterinarian.
No,
so does that mean all cattle
dairy.
or just all
lactating
milk
dairy.
cows?
Yeah, no,
right.
Lactating dairy. I should be very specific on that.
CFIA was very clear that we're not doing any testing on most of the cattle who come into the country. It's only lactating dairy.
I thought that was a good point, actually. It's not all cows, it's lactating dairy. So they're going to be doing this testing. I thought that's a good distinction to make from this woman that we don't really care for in this province. That's our provincial health officer. But we'll just listen a bit more.
Yeah, and in fact, in the US, they've had very little testing of non-lactating dairy. What they have done is all negative, including ground beef surveys, but no one has gotten great surveys. Of course, you all know that this has been largely found in mammary epithelial cells, and so there is actually a reason why it might be less prevalent in beef cattle, but beef cattle are not exclusively male, so it isn't a zero. Okay, so that has been going on, and that's dating now about almost 2 weeks. The other thing is they've opened an asymptomatic cow testing pathway and a testing at slaughter pathway to start getting at that asymptomatic cow reservoir. And
yeah, again, these words again, asymptomatic testing, that I'm worried about what they would do with these results.
Yeah. So when they talk about asymptomatic testing, why are they doing asymptomatic testing, right? Generally speaking, I mean, I think everyone knows this. If you are asymptomatic, that means that your body, if it was exposed to a virus, has overcome the virus. Your immune system has created the antibodies, has had the cross immunity from your T cells, everything else. Your immune system is able to battle it off and win, and then not show any symptoms. So you have some residual virus, okay, as it's being expelled. So, that means you're healthy and you're not going to be contagious, right? And Fauci in 2019 actually came out and said, before COVID, he said, never in the history of respiratory illnesses have asymptomatic people been the drivers of an epidemic? You know, look at the lie. You have real data of real human beings who showed there was no asymptomatic transmission. And then they say, let's look at the models again. And oh my God, right? And
Bonnie always used modeling numbers when I worked at Global. They were just modeling numbers. And those were the numbers we'd put on the TV. And that would be the number that would drive the fear. Like, because those people don't know that modeling numbers aren't really the numbers scientists use. I learned that
they could be completely way off. Yeah. Right? Look at the modeling at the beginning of COVID. They said 2 million people in the US could die.
Okay, I'll move on, but it also is another reason why people would sit in their cars and go and get PCR tests, not sick, to have somebody tell them, am I sick? Like, that is what we did. And so they are proposing to do this to non-symptomatic, asymptomatic animals. Now, this is very worrying to me. Let's go on.
That I don't have numbers for you yet as to how many cows have been tested in there, but I think we're approaching a dozen total symptomatic cows now that have been tested and have all tested negative. So that's the cow testing pathway. The big one, of course, that you're interested in is milk. Jason, it's 9 states, 36 herds, don't know the number of cows in the US, assuming that's what the end of that text I didn't see was. So on milk, you all are aware we put out that notification at a very high level that milk testing would begin in Canada, but to unpack that a little for you, because I'm sure you're curious what that really means. There are 2 things that are being done with milk: experimental studies to validate pasteurization efficacy and effectiveness that has been done in the US. Those are being done in benchtop simulated conditions because we're still level 3 restricted at this point. Those are ongoing. Results should be available. Interim egg culture results should be available on May 21st with finals on May 28th. But we are, of course, anticipating nothing different than the US has found. And one thing that is going on is the US is trying to wheel a pasteurizer, a commercial pasteurizer, into a level 3 to do this in commercial conditions. We're going to let them do that instead of trying to figure out how to put a commercial pasteurizer in the NML.
So effectively, they haven't found any cases of it. They're saying they've all turned out negative. So let's see where this leads.
Let's see what this leads. But also, I think there's been cases where in Canada, we've made farmers dump their milk for whatever, and I haven't actually, don't know why they did it. They were over a certain quota or something, but I do not want to see milk dumping again. And when we get to the end of this video, they really are not fond of pasteurization. And we can talk more about that as the video goes on, but I think they want you to think pasteurization bad. I think that if I went to a cow and had fresh cow's milk unpasteurized, I don't think any harm will come to me. Yeah.
Well, there's a huge attack on raw milk, right? I mean, people have been having raw milk for centuries. Back, I think this was about 5 years ago, I think it was the US FDA. I think it was the FDA. They came in with guns. And I didn't know the FDA was allowed to have, actually, they are. They came in with guns into a raw food milk store, guns drawn, into an organic store that was selling raw milk, and then they confiscated all of the milk. I mean, it's nuts.
That's what we're doing. We're not going into a crack house or a drug deal. You know, we're going into the raw milk store. Congratulations, FDA.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is the pasteurization experimental testing, but then there's actual sampling of commercial milk samples. And the current experimental plan is 300 samples representative across the country that will all be tested at centralized laboratories at CFIA. They're already in process of having been selected. Many of them have actually arrived. Testing is ongoing, and the first batch of results is anticipated, 40 of the 300 samples, probably Monday. So give you a timeline. We do plan to release the results as they come in, and obviously not by single samples, but by batches, so that no one is waiting on the edge of their seat wondering. So anticipate the first set of milk test results to be next week. That, of course, then brings up
which is kind of where we're at today. We're recording this May 30th. Okay.
the question as to what to do with those results, which is something we'd be very interested in discussing with you. I'll just throw out a couple of points and then I'll go over to you, Michelle. But the points obviously to discuss are the follow-up to a positive result in the milk system, and then tracing that back to the actual farm system, how far back that can go, what measures would be appropriate to implement, and what international measures of communication would be necessary from an IHR equivalent perspective, the animal version of an IHR. Yes, whoever popped up communication, I missed the name. There is a robust communication plan, which is accompanying the test plan. I have both draft documents on my desk that have been put together. And obviously there's a lot of messaging that will have to happen with that, starting with the fact that we told you when we were doing this that all the evidence suggests that milk is safe even if we detect RNA. We are doing this to try and understand the burden of disease. Milk is still safe if it's pasteurized, but doubling down on the non-pasteurized milk messaging.
Can we stop there for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so I saw your eyes pop open when he said IHR, and that's
IHR,
exactly.
yeah.
So
Go
that's
ahead.
what he's talking about, the international health regulations that I believe it's partially, not fully legally binding, that the World Health Organization is trying to ram through now as we speak, these amendments, and they shifted the amendments a lot, but basically where it stands right now is I think it's Article 24, 27, and 31 are the ones that are really standing out right now. And they dropped a lot off over the last year and a half because of all the talk and advocacy of so many people bringing attention to it. But 24, 27, Article 31 that they are talking about, that they want to amend. Basically what they're talking about is bringing in vaccine passports, quarantine and isolations for countries to stop movement, and then basically, again, force you to take products that you don't necessarily need or want to have. But again, this could be forced through the IHR amendments. This is the biggest threat right now that we're looking at with the IHR and the World Health Organization. So the fact that we see that the IHR is in our, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada is taking orders from them is alarming, because we know that this is not for our health. And this is the crazy thing. So what they call this is these are called public health emergencies of international concern, right? The pandemics. Do you know what that acronym actually, how you pronounce that acronym? PHEIC? Fake.
Say it again.
PHEIC. Public Health Emergency of International Concern. That actually stands, they actually say fake, right? So now here's one of the scariest things that they have in this pandemic accord is they say that they will be able to call a pandemic a public health emergency of international concern just at the perceived threat of a dangerous outbreak, right? It's not even, it doesn't even have to be there.
Yeah, like I guess on a side note, just like the WHO, Tedros did that, that talk where he's like, "Oh, sorry, it didn't go through. We still are worried about your health." But I always sort of think, I can't trust what they're going to say. They're not going to like back down and put it to bed, the pandemic treaty. And then there is this talk of them still pushing in the IHR through. That's, I think, why my eyeballs went big when he said that. But also the other thing that Mr. Don Shepard said here that I wrote down was that we are going to, this is the last thing he said, that we're going to be doubling down on non-pasteurized milk messaging. This is how these people talk.
Yeah.
You are going after pasteurization as the main evil in the world. Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, I've never heard about an epidemic of people dying from, raw milk.
Oh God, no. Okay, let's go. Let's see what else he says. Oh, and just for people watching, stay tuned, because somebody is going to type a little message in the corner of the screen, and that message is very revealing. So when I see it, well, I'll pause the video. But let's go on.
Which obviously is something we've been doing already. The big reason I'm mentioning this all, though, of course, is that this is a very important area for federal, provincial, territorial collaboration, since many of the activities that will happen would be that would happen around farms, that would happen after a positive result, would indeed be led by your colleagues on the agricultural, I guess, and most ministries in the provinces, the chief vets, and I'm certain many of you are in conversation with your chief vet colleagues, and this would be a good place place to make sure that thinking is done ahead of next week within all of our jurisdictions. So that might be something we want to chat a little bit about.
Don, did you want to make any comments about wastewater? That's the only other, and
Yeah.
the lab.
You know, I would like to make a
Sure,
comment.
I can
please,
talk about
Anita.
that. I actually had that on my list, but I thought I was.
Yeah. You know, I just checked, and according to the FDA, from 1987 to 2010, there were only 3 deaths associated with raw milk consumption.
Yeah, like it's incredible. Yeah, the raw milk messaging. Okay, here we
Using
go.
too much time. So wastewater is something we've looked at. We've talked to some experts.
Now they're talking about wastewater. Okay.
I'll be very clear that we can do wastewater. We can detect H5N1 in wastewater. We don't.
And this is the new thing they call it. It's H5N1. It was called something else, H1N1 before, but now this is H5N1.
It's a different different variant.
It's the new one.
I don't know where that H5N1 in wastewater has come from. Guillaume tells me in a very detailed conversation that the sequences that are robust enough, or that are robust enough, stable enough for us to detect out of wastewater are not variable between avian origin strains and the bovine strains. So we would not be able to determine if this was environmental contamination from avian source, bovine source, or milk dumping, as has been the case in the US, or frankly, even human source, based on the sequences that we would be obtaining. To all of the PT jurisdictions who have the capacity to do that testing, and the QC panels and all the good stuff that you need to do it is available. And so we should be ready for that. There are no indications there's anything particularly special about these sequences. I mean, we know it's an avian strain. We've been able to PCR avian strains before. We can PCR them now. We're just PCRing them from a different sample.
I don't know. What do you think of that? PCRing avian strain.
Well, first of all, we know that the PCR test is completely not fit for purpose. You know, the guy who invented it was the co-winner of the Nobel Prize, Kary Mullis, Dr. Kary Mullis. He said in a panel discussion that he was in, somebody was talking about the PCR test, and he said, "Look," he said, "the PCR test does not tell you if you are sick, right?"
Yeah.
This is a huge thing that everyone needs to understand. When it comes to diagnosing illness, the way that it's always run up to until before COVID was this: you would have a set of clinical symptoms that a doctor would sit there and say, "Listen, we have these symptoms, you know, runny nose, fever, you know, stiff neck, whatever. Looks like meningitis." Then we'll go to the PCR test. Then we will sit there and say, you know, as Kary Mullis said, all the PCR test does is it takes a little bit of something in your body, some molecules, a virus or whatever, and then it doubles and doubles and doubles them to a point where they've aggregated so much that you can actually look at them, observe them, and talk about them, and then say, and this would be a secondary confirmation. So if you've got clinical symptoms, then you've got the PCR saying, yes, we've got that virus in there. Yes, let's diagnose this person with this disease. You cannot take PCR, like Kary Mullis said, and you make that the primary diagnostic tool, because you're going to get fake results, especially when you're only supposed, when they actually double the amount of the virus or whatever they have, they call that the number of cycles. So they said only go up to about 24 cycles. After that, you're going to basically 25, 26, 27 cycles. You're going to take such a minute amount and double it so much that will actually give you a false positive.
Unfortunately, Kary Mullis lost his life right before the outbreak, I think in 2019. That's a really unfortunate turn of events there.
Yeah,
that's a whole other thing. But do these people not understand? These are our scientists. Do they not understand that that what a PCR is for? It was never to detect coronavirus.
Yeah, thanks for that, Don. I think our question is kind of really around the milk sampling. It's happening as of Monday. I mean, we have heard from our vet colleagues that it's probably Eastern Ontario where they're collecting specimens from. I'm not sure, has there been a call, or maybe I've missed it, around bringing together all the PTs where the milk has been collected from, to have sort of common expectations on where is this happening? What's the turnaround time between the CFIA positive to the local agri ministries to do the follow-up at the farms? And, you know, what's the expectation for being able to find which farms it might have been coming from, what our human health expectations are going to be for, you know, once we do find those farms. I'm not sure that we've actually, it sounds like you have a communication plan about that first announcement of a positive from a CFI retail sampling. But I think there's a lot of steps after that we are working with our agri colleagues on, but I think it would be good to harmonize, because you might have multiple positives across the country at the same time. And are we all do this in a similar way?
No, and that's
I think that's a very scary question. To me, what I gather from what she's saying is, what if we have these positives all across the country, and then we've got to coordinate with our local agriculture authorities, and then get on the farms, and then what are we going to do with the farms? I mean, step by step by step, it doesn't sound like it sounds like they're going to put the farmers into. You know what I mean? Like they're going to come to their farms and destroy their stock.
Exactly. They're going to call their herds their flocks. I mean, this is what happened with, H5N1. There's been cullings of poultry. I was learning before about there is a swine virus that came out in the 2000s, and they were tracing this and then basically slaughtering tons of pigs all over the US. And then it turns out that somehow, like the virus, when they actually traced it back, started from like some obscure place in, I think it was like Singapore or somewhere like that, and somehow it wound up in the US, led to the slaughter of all these cows. And there's a lot of people that that say, listen, it wasn't necessary. The drugs that they were giving were not helping. And again, it was another pre-COVID example of what COVID was, right? You have manipulation of this virus, the surveillancing, and then slaughtering of animals. This is what we need to worry about, is to see the food supply again being attacked. In the US, what's happening with all those farms there? I mean, so many farms have burned down.
Yeah. Like what I was watching a show yesterday, Kelly Victory was interviewing someone on this topic, but also like they are sort of doing, the labs around the country, or in the US at least, possibly here, are doing this kind of gain of function research related to this. It's like lab manipulation also, even with these chickens and farms and things like that. And also, if one bird got legitimately sick, then that bird would pass away. The bird, or it'd be a very small number you'd have to deal with. But our governments and our authorities want to wipe out the herd, literally. Like they, if one bird, one swine, one bovine animal got sick, that's one. The contamination is small. It's not going to spread like wildfire. And I would question how they get sick in the first place. I think there's lab manipulation behind it, but
Well, in today's world, I wouldn't be surprised with anything anymore.
No, I know. Okay, we'll move on a little bit, and I'll see if I can. We'll just watch a little bit more, and here we go.
The reason for this call, this is obviously, as you can
So
imagine,
is it just these 3 provinces that are getting where
No,
the
it's
sampling is happening?
across the country. It is a representative sample across the country, so it should be in all jurisdictions. That may be an exception of the territories, obviously. It's all jurisdictions that actually have milk production. They're sampling from.
We don't have a protocol, to be honest, to be escalating in the time of prevention, as I said, but things.
Before we get on to what she says, on the last screen, I think it's, oh yeah, here it is on the bottom, on the right-hand corner, if I can draw the viewer's attention to this. Somebody has typed in, has anyone here ever read a virus isolation study? Members of the public are pointing out what they call the missing virus problem and weaknesses in the methodologies of virologists. It seems no one actually has a sample of the virus to study. So do we really know for a fact that it's real?